It's been about a decade since the United States kicked off this massive nationwide experiment, basically turning a century of cannabis prohibition on its head. So today, we're going to peel back the layers and really dig into the results. We're asking what actually happens when a nation goes from criminalization to full-on commercialization. First, let's talk about the number that really got the ball rolling for everyone. A whopping $25 billion. That's the amount of tax revenue legal states have collected from adult-use cannabis sales since 2014. This was the golden promise of legalization, right? A huge new pot of money for schools, for public health, for infrastructure, all from a product that used to be sold completely in the shadows. But let's be real, that huge number doesn't tell the whole story, does it? For every single dollar of tax revenue, there are trade-offs, there are unintended consequences. So that's the big question we're tackling today. Beyond the money, what is the true balance sheet of this marijuana experiment? Let's get into it. Okay, first up, let's just talk about how massive this change has been. What started as a really bold move by just a couple of states has exploded into a coast-to-coast reality. It's totally reshaped how we think about policy and how the public sees cannabis across the entire country. And this map really says it all, right? The shift has been just dramatic. As of 2025, 24 states plus DC have legalized recreational cannabis. And when you add in the states that have medical-only programs, you can see that the vast majority of the country has moved away from total prohibition. This isn't some niche policy anymore. This is the new American mainstream. All right, so let's get into what really pushed this whole movement forward: the money. The promise of a booming new industry, one that creates jobs and wealth, was probably one of the most powerful arguments for legalization. So how's that actually working out? The economic footprint here is just staggering. In 2025 alone, the industry is on track to pump over $123 billion into the U.S. economy. And that's because of something called the multiplier effect. It's pretty cool, actually. For every single dollar you spend in a dispensary, another $2.50 gets generated out in the wider economy. We're talking about a whole ecosystem of other businesses: lawyers, accountants, security guards, even the tech companies making those fancy grow lights. But when you look at jobs, the story gets a lot more complicated. Sure, emerging markets are seeing absolutely explosive growth. Just look at New York, up 209%. But the mature markets, they're hitting a wall. States like Colorado are actually losing thousands of jobs. It's being called a strategic reset, where companies in markets that are just flooded with product have to focus on being efficient instead of just growing like crazy. So yeah, the green rush for jobs is real, but it's definitely not happening everywhere at once. And this whole situation in California is a perfect cautionary tale. It shows the razor's edge that states are walking on. In 2025, they decided to hike the cannabis tax. And the result? Legal sales immediately tanked to a 5-year low. Why? It's simple. The illegal market doesn't pay taxes. So when the legal stuff gets too pricey, customers just go right back to their dealers. California had to scramble to reverse the tax hike, and it was a huge lesson for every other state. Tax it too much, and you risk killing the golden goose. Okay, let's switch gears from the economy to public health, because this is where things get really nuanced. Cannabis has been talked about as both a potential solution to one major health crisis and, well, the potential start of a new one. So one of the biggest hopes for legalization was that it could be an exit ramp from the opioid epidemic. And a big reason for that is how people see it. When you ask consumers, they view opioids as almost 5 times more addictive than cannabis. So for someone who's just trying to manage their pain, cannabis seems like a much safer choice. And some studies are starting to show that opioid prescriptions actually do drop when recreational dispensaries open up. But, and this is a huge but, there's a much darker side to this public health story. The cannabis on the market today is not your parents' weed. We're talking about high-potency THC products being the norm, and the data on the risks is, well, it's alarming. Daily use of these products is linked to a 4 times higher risk of psychosis. And that last number, accidental ingestion by kids under 6, has skyrocketed by over 1,300%, mostly from edibles that are designed to look just like candy. So what about the kids? What about teenagers? You'd think it's a simple story, but the data is surprisingly tricky. The good news is that overall, teen use has actually kept declining and is still at historic lows, even in legal states. It seems a regulated market is just better at checking IDs than the black market. The worry, though, is normalization. As teens see cannabis as less and less harmful, the small group who do use it might be more likely to use it heavily. All right, let's talk about what, for many people, is the moral core of this entire movement: social justice. For decades, the war on drugs just devastated minority communities disproportionately. A key goal of legalization was to stop the arrests and start repairing some of that damage. And on one front, the success has been absolutely breathtaking. In 2024 alone, the state of California automatically expunged nearly 1 million past cannabis convictions. This is just a massive victory for justice reform. It's freeing a huge number of people from the lifelong baggage of a criminal record. But 1 million? What does a number like that actually mean for a person's life? Well, as this quote explains, a conviction, even a minor one, can be like a permanent scarlet letter. It can lock you out of a job, an apartment, a student loan. So wiping those records clean isn't just symbolic. It's a direct path to economic opportunity. It's a real second chance. But here's the thing. Legalization hasn't been a silver bullet for fixing systemic bias, not by a long shot. This data from California in 2023 is just stark. Even with cannabis being legal, Black individuals are still being stopped by police at a rate 126% higher than their share of the population. The old patterns of policing are sticking around, even after the laws have changed. Now, to try and fix this, most legal states have these things called social equity programs. The idea is to help people from communities that were hit hardest by the war on drugs to become business owners in the new industry. And there are some wins. Minnesota gave over half its licenses to equity applicants. But the hurdles are just immense. Since cannabis is still illegal on the federal level, these entrepreneurs can't get normal bank loans. And in places like Washington, they're walking into a market that's already flooded, where it's almost impossible to compete. So the promise is there, but the reality is a serious, serious uphill battle. So where does that leave us? After a decade of all this data, what's the final verdict? Well, the truth is, there isn't one. The cannabis experiment is still unfolding. It's entering a whole new phase of maturing and maybe finally getting federal recognition. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that this isn't some simple switch you can flip for a perfect outcome. It's a constant, tricky balancing act. States are trying to grab these massive economic benefits while also managing some very real public health risks. They're celebrating incredible progress on things like expungements, while at the same time, they're grappling with the fact that deep-seated inequities don't just vanish overnight. And this whole experiment is on the verge of a brand new chapter. The federal government looks like it's finally ready to reschedule cannabis for the first time in over 50 years. That could mean access to banking, to real research, to interstate commerce. So that brings us to our final question. As this grand experiment goes national, will we finally find the right balance? And that's all the time we have for this one. Thanks for joining us to explore this really complex topic. And a quick shout out to our sponsor for making this explainer possible, marijuana.school.